All right, thanks. I'll try to keep this short. I'm super glad that Jeff and Xiaoqin already spoke, because they've given you an idea of what the future might actually look like and how it might be better. But I think everybody in this room realizes that there are significant challenges in our field right now. And we've heard about a lot of these over the last few hours and yesterday. There's a lot of problems more generally, in that if we try to compare things, we have this interoperability problem. We've made some great strides towards this by exceptional manual labeler, building things with Python, and now able to convert between a few packages, but we still are missing things like really good standards that allow us to take a calculation from one package and take it into another package, or even get rid of the scourge that is PDB that Pat Walters has railed against. We really have problems with evaluation as well, where it's really difficult, as we've been learning, to compare predictive models, because we generally don't have common benchmark sets on which people should actually use things. We heard today about comparing over 10 log orders of magnitude on big compiled data sets that aren't representative of what's been going on. And we're super glad that we have predictive challenges that focus everybody on the same kinds of predictions. And there's, anytime we make choices about how to prepare biomolecular simulation systems, we've learned from previous exercises here that a lot of the choices you have to make on, just to get something that you can use your predictive model on, are actually really important, and that sometimes you can make different choices, and that's really determining how people actually succeed or don't succeed, and how they fare in all of these challenges. So in previous sample, for example, we've learned that the way you prepare a host-guest system has a huge impact on exactly what kinds of predictions you can make. And so one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, in the way we've been doing the challenges previously, are we evaluating the driver, or are we evaluating the technology? And we as a field have to ask ourselves, do we want to be evaluating the technology rather than just evaluating who's better at using a certain kind of technology? And so I would argue that we really want to do this, and that the stuff that Jeff has been doing and other folks have been participating in with Kelp is really finally starting to get at evaluating the technology and isolating it from the driver in the seat. Obviously, there will always be really great drivers in pharma, but if we want to give them the best equipment, we at least have to be evaluating it on a fair level ground. So to actually do this, we also need better models, right? And a lot of these models do come from academics who would like to focus on the thing that they do best. They may not want to have to engineer from scratch an entire pipeline for protonating a PDB file, or building in missing hydrogens, or things like that. They want to focus on the creative efforts of their process. And industry would like to take these methods and combine the best practices, link them together, and actually do something useful to make predictions, right? They also don't want to have to spend years re-implementing things from scratch. If you're trying to do a free energy calculation in GROMACS, this is all the steps you need. And suppose I just want to do one little thing right here, which is focus on a better way of sampling. I have to engineer this entire pipeline from scratch, and every decision I make up here is going to impact the results I get down here. And this is just something it makes it super hard for academics to actually make progress and focus on what they would like to do. As we've heard about many times, reproducing work from a published manuscript is nearly impossible. Even with detailed method sections, it might still take you a year or two. There's a lot of cases where industry will go out and actually sign a contract with an academic that takes a few months. They'll implement the stuff in-house or make it robust enough to run on an internal database. They'll run on an internal database, and maybe they'll have an idea of how well it works after a year or two. And then finally, when the academic leaves, it's still very hard for people inside of the institution to actually continue to run this software. It's a huge problem. And when we do find methods that work well in D3 and sample, sometimes it's really hard to figure out, like, what was the method that was actually used? Can we recreate it again? Like, here are some sample data dumps here's a pretty good detailed methods description, but it's still pretty complicated. It involves a lot of tools. I know this is really small to see. Then sometimes you just get a single sentence that says, here's what I did. And it's not really easy to reproduce this, even if we do know which methods are performing well consistently. Deploying these things is also really hard. It's really difficult to take research software and use it in a robust manner in different circumstances. My own group works really, really hard to try to make things conda installable. All the dependencies are hidden from you. Just one line can install everything, but we still have to fly a postdoc out to Merck and Darmstadt once a quarter in order to actually make sure it works with their their batch queue system. So there's still challenges to actually deploying these things internally. Training is also a huge problem. We've heard a little bit about the TDT, Teach, Discover, Treat, which is meant to like help train new computational chemists by focusing on workflows and really understanding what goes into computational chemistry. But it's still really difficult when you have descriptions of the protocol that look like this. A student would have to puzzle them out and maybe not know all of the things that they have to worry about when they're actually trying to implement each of these stages if you don't have something that's really reproducible. Also, funding is a big problem. I've heard a lot of program officers and people in industry say we don't get the return on investment because when we invest in a methodology or invest in some sort of algorithm, it's not something that other people end up using. So we end up throwing money down a hole. It would be much better to capture the results of those products and have them be reusable by other people. And finally, validation. It's for blind challenges. We heard Pat mention that 90% of his time is actually cramming data into the right file format, even if we specify it beforehand. If you had something where you removed the person from it and it was conforming to interfaces for what was supposed to go in and come out, you could automatically validate the output of that and solve this entire problem. That entire problem would just go away. So workflows really offer, at least reproducible workflows, offer a solution to all of these problems. And I think it won't magically solve everything overnight, but it'll take some work to get to that point. I think you've already heard about the key to the solution. And I just want to change gears for a little bit to say, here's some folks that can help us. So I'm not actually directly involved with MOLSI. It's the Molecular Sciences Software Institute. It is a $30 million NSF-sponsored initiative that is meant to help us solve these problems. So there's finally a new opportunity to go to experts who can really help sort this out. And what they are, they just started in August 1st, 2016, NSF funded. It's a collaboration amongst directors at multiple institutes. And it's part of their National Strategic Computing Initiative from the NSF. It's not a huge amount of money, right? It's not going to cure all of our problems, but at least they can help us wrangle some of our problems and maybe find more money to solve them elsewhere. And it's really meant to serve our community. So we should talk to them and see what we can do to help get them to help us. They have a bunch of directors who are faculty and engaged in very different research areas. Some of them are interoperability and cyber infrastructure. This is directed by Dan Crawford. Other folks are in our biomolecular simulation area, so it's good to talk to them or reach out to them. But they also have software scientists. Now, these are people who are previously experienced with molecular sciences, but are really invested in engineering really good, robust software and helping others engineer robust software as well. So they are accumulating expertise at Virginia Tech, where this is headquartered. And they are also helping mentor fellows that are embedded in different research groups around the world. So that's another way in which we can interact with them. And they have activities like training, software summer schools that I've been involved in that are really helping change the kind of software people produce and the way people produce software. But they can also help us specify standards. And so we're trying to get them interested in actually helping us solve this workflows problem. They are in need of more biomolecular scientists. So if you know someone who would really enjoy doing good software science, really enjoy enabling research, there's an open job ad right now. So they would like some more people. So this is partly why this effort is still a little bit slow. They have expertise on the quantum side. They're trying to accumulate enough software scientists on the biomolecular side to really have an impact. But they do organize these workshops, and these workshops can be nucleating points for bringing together like-minded individuals to actually talk about and try to start solving these problems. So co-sponsored with Autodesk, who is interested in the life sciences and open source software right now, we had a little workshop over in San Francisco. Where the idea was that we would get people together who are talking about distributed workflows for molecular simulation. We had some pharma folks, including Jeff Blaney and Brad Sherborne, come by and talk to us about the needs of pharma. We had some success stories about other fields that have already been transformed by making this leap to reproducible workflows. And we had some other folks who are doing really trailblazing technology about making this sort of future actually possible, including folks from OpenEye who are here today talking about Orion, which I think is a really compelling way to think about how we can move cloud-based workflows that solve all sorts of other problems. Also, cloud computing technologists are also very interested, and these are a good way to prevent ourselves from having to worry about installing something on a janky batch queue system somewhere in Darmstadt. All right, so how can the future be different, right? What would computational chemistry in 2020 look like? It would be great to, and this is my dream, is that suppose somebody publishes a paper and they just have a DOI or a little badge that resolves to a common workflow component registry. And that is where you grab a container which has exactly what was used to run all of the data in that program or in that paper on. And there's also a registry for the standard benchmark data set against which they ran it. So you could grab those two things, you could reproduce exactly the results of that paper, and you could then run new data through it. Maybe it's private data, maybe it's another public data set, maybe it's a new public data set, or something that comes out in the future through continuous evaluation. And you can really see how well this works. And what it requires is this registry ends up being like an app store. You have to have common inputs and outputs. And then we can start to, both through industry and academia, evaluate these workflows. And there could be other models, like eventually people will want to, of course, some of these tools actually cost money, right? So there might be interesting ways you can actually pay for privacy, but still benchmark publicly with some of these tools. So if we don't do this, there's a big cost, right? So we end up with opportunity costs that are in the order of, there's going to be proliferation of, right now there's several workflow engines, and they all have great advantages and different platforms that they run in and different things that are native to them, but they don't yet support a common format, like a common component format. So you could either have a common workflow that you can move to different workflow engines, or you can have a common component that you can at least say a tool can be wrapped up to have an input and output and be pulled into a particular context or not. And then, of course, there could be the metastasis side where one workflow engine dominates, and then it's not necessarily good for us either if there's monoculture. So we are talking about forming a group to talk about how we make common interoperable workflow components where academics would wrap a toolkit once, and then software vendors can also make tools available via licensing schemes. And then we could hopefully build this ecosystem of tools that interoperate with each other. And this could really change the way things happen. This could be supported along more specialized formats. Like I know everybody else already has a specialized format for their workflows, but it could be that just the ability to support something generic can also be so valuable that this would be a big motivating factor. And so we need to define a bunch of different things. There also is the possibility of interoperable workflows as well, but I'm going to skip that. Some of this is being done in coordination with the journal that David Mobley had mentioned, LiveComms, where the idea is that you have best practices that are codified in language with references about why they are best practices, but those could be then implemented in actual software workflows that are tethered to those best practices and updated at the same time. So we ended up getting a few workflow groups together. A few folks together to focus on different classes of workflows we thought would be important. In fact, Jeff Wagner led one of these. There's other things that are still big challenges here, like how we set up and standardize biomolecular simulation setup. And we tried to come up with incentives that, why would a workflow engine developer actually want to adopt this? Why would a tool developer want to encapsulate their tools? Why would industry actually want to support something like this? And why would infrastructure support providers actually be interested in this sort of thing? We wanted to make the lives of everyone better and really try to move towards evaluating the technology in exactly the way that Jeff highlighted, right? So if you have a modeling tool that's containerized in some way, and you had a standard preparation pipeline and a standard analysis pipeline that maybe encapsulated PATS tools, we had benchmark data sets that we could feed through, then we could actually evaluate how well different tools did on a common level playing field. And it solves the reproducibility problem, it solves the portability problem, because whatever is in this container is going to run the same way today, it's going to run the same way tomorrow, and it's going to run on any of the architectures that you're actually running on. And it's reproducible in time. You could also ask the question of which of the preparation best practices is actually the better practice, because you can evaluate different variants of those through a variety of different modeling tools and start to settle on one of these things being a superior way to do things for a large class of different predictive models. But it does require we do a lot of work here in standardizing the way in which these things communicate and interoperate. And that's the real challenge for a working group, to define how we actually shove data in and out of these different formats and how we expose the functionality in the different components. So we were talking about exactly what we needed to do, and we got a bunch of folks together in San Francisco and used something called Luma techniques. This is something that many of you probably haven't heard of yet, but it's a design thinking technique. We were all educated by the Autodesk folks who are very good at this. It basically involves a lot of Post-it notes. So you got a bunch of scientists trying to first capture what the requirements were, sort them in different ways. They were a little bit confused at first and didn't know quite what to do, but then they ended up interacting in an interesting way. Each one of these groups is clustering different ideas and different requirements for algorithms need to be encapsulated, what data needs to flow in different ways. They eventually made there were many heated debates, I'll tell you that, but eventually made some progress in actually wrangling these into groups of requirements. And some of it was societal and cultural issues as well that we needed to work through. So this process was called affinity clustering, for example, protein preparation and docking. Then we combined everything else and tried to figure out what exactly needed to happen and how data needed to flow. You can see this process is sort of iterative. Eventually, what we tried to do is prioritize how important are each of these opportunities and how difficult are they, and then try to identify things that were tractable in the near term that MALC could actually help us with. Sometimes everything lines up on this Pareto front where it's not really, there's nothing easy to do, at least in solving community-based issues. But at least on the software issues, there are a number of things that are tractable in the near term that we could actually move forward on. And this one I've circled here is this common workflow component definition and registry. So we're trying to form a working group that will actually start to define some of these things. And we need to define the format of encapsulating these things inside of Docker or other kinds of portable images, the input and output formats, how you expose their functionality by an API, and some sort of registry that will take these. It's not too difficult, but we just need to get a few folks in the room to actually make this prototype happen. There's already been a lot of work that we can use from other fields that have produced things like Singularity Hub, for example. Singularity is a really nice, robust, secure way of doing this. Docker has some security issues, but already for scientific exchange, some folks at Stanford have put together Singularity Hub, which makes it very easy to share componentized tools. And one of the great things about this is that we could, in principle, try to incentivize people for submitting these Dockerized containers by trying to get AWS or Google Compute time so that you don't have to run these things yourself. You don't have to spend human time on them. You just, after you've validated your container, you submit it and you don't have to worry about it. All of the computation is handled for you. So I think that could be a big incentive for people to actually participate in a future iteration of this challenge. And I think with that, I am all done. So I'm happy to, we can just go into the discussion maybe.